Hey everybody, welcome to the Tatter-a-fact podcast where PMU gets real, raw, and unapologetic. I am Teryn Darling with Girls Inc., your no bullshit mentor with 25 years in the game. So let's raise the bar and let's keep it there. Glad to have you all with me today. And I got a great topic. And the reason the topic's anesthetics. And the reason I decided to talk about that on today's episode is because we're getting a lot of emails and a lot of questions specifically on anesthetics. So we're going to dive into the drippy, misunderstood, and sometimes eyeball widening world of topical anesthetics in PMU. So one of the questions that we got, and we've got this a few times, is, how can I prevent my anesthetics from melting all over the face? It's frustrating, it's annoying, yada, yada, yada. So why anesthetics melt and drip once they hit the skin? There's a few different reasons it can happen. It can happen on oily and warm skin types, right? Women of a certain age, their hormones are changing, sometimes raging, and even hot flashes are happening. And I can tell you, not to get personal, but I'm going through that right now. And I never really thought hot flashes were that big a deal. I was like the type of person like, how bad can it be? I wasn't that sympathetic when Kat was going through them. And not because I'm not a sympathetic person. I'm just like, well, how hot can they be? I mean, hot flashes. I mean, I couldn't wrap my brain around why they're so bad and feel so bad to the women getting them. Well, karma's a bitch, right? And if you're lucky, karma will let you sit back and watch. And so Kat's been very lucky. Karma's been good to Kat because Kat has been able to sit back and now watch me go through my hot flashes. And it's bad. It is bad. The other day, we were out at the antique store and I got a hot flash so fucking bad, you guys. I had to run into the restroom and go into the stall, and I had to take my shirt off. I had to get like naked from the top up. I just had to. I had to get that shirt off. And it was that bad. So I can tell you, hot flashes are bad. So now I am, very sympathetic. Now, moving forward, two things I may not even understand. So, yeah, anesthetics can melt and drip, right? When the skin is oily. That makes sense. Oily skin can melt and cause an anesthetic to get all drippy. Warm skin, some clients just naturally have warm skin. They don't necessarily need to be even going through hormonal changes and having hot flashes. But then you add on women going through hormone changes and hot flashes. And we're all working on women that are going through those sorts of things right now. I certainly am. So that can cause an anesthetic to get melty and drippy. The climate or your room temperature, right? I'm in Vegas. Yesterday, I think it was 113 degrees outside. So you can have a client come in to your room straight from being outside, and maybe she was running errands all day before her appointment with you, and she's been out in that 100 degrees, 113 degrees. You know, maybe it's humid in your client, hot and humid. And she comes in and her skin's warm. You know, she's hot because she's been out in those hot temperatures. And normally she doesn't have warm skin. It's just the climate made her really hot. Or it could be your room temperature, right? Some artists like a really warm room. I have worked alongside colleagues trained in their facility where they like their studios really warm. You know, I think I'm moderate. I've also worked with colleagues that like their studios really super cool, like my good friend Mary Richardson. I mean, she likes it freezing cold. I can't even tattoo because my hand's shivering. And then there's the complete opposite that like their room temperature is really warm. So those are some reasons anesthetics can get melty or drippy, but they're not the only reasons, right? Anesthetics come in different types of formulas. You have anesthetics that have a water base and can be really watery, or have an oily base and can be really oily. So there's watery and oily formulas. And even anesthetics, even within the anesthetic world, there's high quality and poor quality, just like everything else in our industry. So these anesthetics, some of these anesthetics can be made with poor quality carriers that can liquefy very, very fast, right? So there's some reasons right there. It can also happen from over application. Maybe that anesthetic wouldn't get all melty and drippy if it was applied in moderation. Like you smeared it and kind of melted into the skin and now it stays put. But if you're putting big globs on the skin or, you know, the brow area, now it's going to get melty or drippy. So it can happen from over application. So it's always good. There's a number of reasons. We're going to get into some of them a little later on, but there's lots of different reasons that applying anesthetics moderately is always going to be a good thing. So when your anesthetic melts and gets all drippy on the skin, all kinds of problems can arise from that, right? One, your mapping, like pencils and markers just don't go on nicely and they smear, right? I mean, that can happen with just oily clients. So if you're using anesthetics that are melty and drippy and have an oily base and you didn't clean that anesthetic off the skin well, that can leave like an oily film on the skin. And good luck trying to get your pencil to draw on that, or a marker. I use red Sharpie markers to map a lot of my eyeliner work. And so I have to make sure that I have the anesthetic, I'm using really good anesthetics and the anesthetic is wiped off and the skin is really clean, no anesthetic, or that red marker won't show up on the skin. It won't write. And that's a really important part of my mapping and my design and my symmetry and my width for my eyeliners. Just like our pencils, no matter what pencil you use or mapping string, right? If the skin is oily, we all know the struggles getting mapping string and pencils to show up on the skin. But this can also be caused by oily anesthetics that melt and drip and are not thoroughly removed from the skin before you do your mapping, right? And as you go through the procedure, your mapping can smear. It can completely leave the skin. So that's one problem that we can have with anesthetics being, greasy and smearing all over the place and not cleansing it off the skin properly. Another problem, which is a more risky problem, right? The mapping, pencils, markers, that's all really annoying, super annoying. And maybe you risk not, maybe the design is a little bit at risk, but there's no like health risks to that. It's just more annoying, and it could mess up your design if you're completely reliant on your design. It could cause you more time, because if it smears off, you got to maybe sit the client back up and redraw. And, we don't want to have to do that. We do not want to have to do that. We want our mapping pencils and designs to last as long as we need them to last. We don't want to waste time, with them smearing off and having to redraw. Now, with product migration, with anesthetics migrating, it can migrate into the eyeball possibly. So if you're doing an eyeliner and that anesthetic, once that anesthetic hits the skin and melts, there is a really high risk of that anesthetic getting into the eyeball. And that could be a problem. That can cause stinging and all kinds of other things. It just depends on the quality of the anesthetic and the anesthetic itself. But even with a really good quality anesthetic that is meant for the eyeliner, once you apply that to the eye area for numbing and client comfort, if it gets all melty and drippy and seeps in under the lash line and into the eyeball, at the very least, the client could feel some slight stinging, some slight burning. Now this is happening to an artist. One question we got, one email we got, is she's applying the anesthetic to the eyebrows. She doesn't even do eyeliner. And it's dripping all the way down the client's temples. And there's been a few occasions that it's gotten on the eyelids. And so she's worried about the anesthetic getting into the eye. Well, yeah, that could be a problem. That could be a problem. So, certainly if you have anesthetic applied to the brow area and it's dripping down the temples or straight down the forehead and heading to the eye, you want to blot that off, before it hits the eye. Now, if you're using a really good anesthetic, that you're using a really good anesthetic, and, it's just happening, then you might want to put, some cotton. How hairdressers put cotton around the outer edge, right at the roots, like along your forehead, along your temples, so the dye doesn't drip into your eyes, because that would hurt. We can do the same thing. You can do the same thing. I've never had to do that because I just have. Now, in my early days, I have had some anesthetics that got all melty and drippy, and I just kept shopping and trying different anesthetics that didn't get all melty and drippy. And I did find my set of anesthetics that work for me, and I'll talk about them a little bit later. So product migration, that's a big one, especially if it's getting into the eyeball or there's a risk of it getting into the eyeball. Like, we want to avoid anesthetics getting into the eyeball itself. Even you guys, if that particular anesthetic is made and stated that it can be used for the eyeliner. It's still going to say on the label, avoid eye contact, because it is still an anesthetic. It might be pH balanced, high quality ingredients, right? Made super responsibly, made for the eye, safe for the eye. It says it's safe for the eye. We trust this manufacturer. But it's still going to state avoid contact with the eye, because there's a risk of stinging and burning, and we just don't want to get anesthetic in the eye. All right, but it does happen. It does happen sometimes. It happens with me. It does. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I do my best not to get it into the eye, and I apply it sparingly. I use really good anesthetic. But, sometimes the clients, if they're tearing, if they're nervous, that can cause, a little sweat and the skin to get warm, because, clients get nervous. So once I go to cleanse, I tell them to keep their eyes closed during the numbing session. But I always warn them, I'm about to clean off your anesthetic. I'm going to lift your eyelid open and I'm going to start cleansing. You may feel a slight stinging or burning. If you do, it should be very mild and it will go away within seconds once I clean it off. And that happens sometimes, but I made them aware. And I clean off the anesthetic, wipe it all dry, and then I tell them to open their eyes and blink. And I ask, do you feel any stinging or any burning or anything uncomfortable? And 99.9% of the time, they say no. Over 5,000 eyeliners, 99.9% of the time, they say no. Once in a blue moon, I'll have a client say, yeah, I feel like something's in there. I still feel a little stingy. I'll get my sterile eye flush and I will flush the eye. That's why it's always important to have eye flush out, especially when you're doing eyeliners. I'll flush the eye really good, tell them to blink. How do you feel now? Perfect, ready to rock and roll. Okay, so another problem that can happen with anesthetics melting and dripping all over the place is inconsistent numbing effects, right? Think about it. If you apply your numbing to your eyebrow and it's melting everywhere, it's spread and it's melting, you see some drippage down the temples, you got to blot it off. Maybe some areas of the brow, it really did shift and move. And then some areas of the brow more adhered and stayed in place. Then you could have inconsistent numbing. You can have some areas of the brow where that anesthetic was allowed to do what it's supposed to do, and you got really good numbing in that area. And then in some areas of the brow, it shifted way too much, to the point where it removed possibly, or you had very little anesthetic in some areas. And there's very little effect, very little numbing in some areas. So that can happen. You can get inconsistent numbing effects. And that becomes really important when we're working on clients that tend to have a lower pain tolerance. You like our redheads, light skin, light eyes, right? Those clients typically have a lower pain tolerance. So we want the anesthetic to stay in place so we get the full numbing effect. I think that's really important. And when I'm doing eyeliner, I certainly want that anesthetic to stay in place. I want my client to be as comfortable as possible. Because when my client's as comfortable as possible, then I can go in and focus on the work. I can focus on the tattooing. I don't have to really focus and manage her pain or her discomfort, because there is none. I can just focus on the design and getting all that pigment in there and symmetry. And I'm just hyper-focused on the work. When a client is in discomfort and, they're making noises, they're telling you to stop, it's distracting, and it messes up my flow, my mojo and my flow and my rhythm, and it's distracting. So I don't want to be distracted in my procedures. No procedure do I want to be distracted. So I want my clients numb. And that's exceptionally true when it comes to eyeliner. So another effect it can have, a negative effect, slipping, melting, dripping eyeliner, anesthetic, is it can cause hand slippage and mess with our grip and stretch, right? We deal with that on oily skin. Oily skin can cause hand slippage. It can cause us to, not be able to get the tight, taut grip we want, resulting in not getting the tight, taut stretch we want. So anesthetics that melt and drip can do the same thing. It could do the same thing. If you got anesthetic on the brow that's melting and dripping, and it melted and dripping down the temple area, down the forehead a little bit, and you just kind of blot that off and remove it with, a gauze pad or a cotton pad, but you don't really cleanse it to completely remove it and strip it from the skin, because that's not where you're tattooing. So you just think removing it from that area, with a cotton pad is good enough until you go to stretch, because the temple area, the forehead area, those are areas where we place our palms, we place our fingers, we place parts of our hands to get that grip. So hand slippage is really, really annoying. And that's something I certainly don't want to deal with. And it can be super frustrating, cause all kinds of things. Do you know? I mean, I used to teach a lot of classes, and I would see artists sit there, for 5 minutes trying to get the stretch that they need, because that skin was super oily. And that sort of thing can happen with anesthetics. Anesthetics that have an oily base and drip all over the place, and they're not being properly cleansed off the skin, completely. So it's really important to clean off anesthetics, completely clean them thoroughly off the skin, especially if you're working with oil-based anesthetics. So, what are some of the things, some little helpful tips we can do to prevent these issues? Well, first, we can clean the skin properly. Clean the skin properly. And, excuse me. And when it comes to anesthetics that have an oily base, that can be a little bit more difficult to completely remove off the skin, right? You don't want to leave a film, an oily film on the skin. So I have a new OMG product coming. I've been working on it for a very long time. This is what I'm doing now in my career. Well, doing my podcast, I'm lecturing and speaking at conferences. I got the PMU conference in Miami, PMU World Live coming up. And I'm really doing products. I'm like hyper-focused on addressing pain points, areas of annoyance and frustration, usually called pain points for artists, and trying to come up with solutions and products to address those pain points. So I do have a new OMG product coming soon, and that's all I can say now, or I will get into trouble. But I'll let you know when that's on its way. You can blot intentionally when it starts to drip. Not too much that you remove it all, but intentionally and carefully just blot a little bit. Wrap a tissue around your finger and blot just a little bit so it doesn't drip. Especially if you, after applying it, you're like, yeah, I got a little bit too much on there. Then you can remove a little bit, blot a little bit off. But, and then you can take a Q-tip and smear it back out and make sure all the skin, the entire area, is covered evenly and smoothly with anesthetic. Because remember, like big globs they're at a higher risk for melting and getting all drippy. And then the other thing you can do is choose more stable, melt-free formulas, anesthetic formulas. That's what I do. That's why I've been using like the same anesthetics for a long, long time. And one of the anesthetics that I use for my eyeliner is migrating. I use migrating. And migrating is melt-free. They actually say that in their description. And it's for eyes. And it's pH balanced for the eyes. So I love migrating. It stays in place. Now, even though it's meant for the eyes, because it's pH balanced, it's melt-free, it stays in place, doesn't drip, doesn't move, that doesn't mean you can't use it for the brows or for lips. You certainly can. But it was a specific formula made for the eye area. There was 2 anesthetics that I used for my eyeliner work. And one was Eyes of Blue. Eyes of Blue was also melt-free, very stable, very good anesthetic. And that was formulated, produced, sold by Face and Body. And a couple of years ago, Greg Yates, he's the owner of Face and Body, good colleague of mine for many, many years, decided to retire. And when he retired, Eyes of Blue went with him. And there was a lot of really sad people because Eyes of Blue was such a fantastic anesthetic for eyes, for the eyeliners, right? Because it didn't move, didn't melt and drip in the eye. You didn't have to worry about it. It was just fantastic. But thank goodness we have Dr. Dixon, Linda Dixon, and she is the creator of migrating. And so migrating, I always had both in my studio. And so if you're somebody who was using Eyes of Blue and you don't know where to turn to, migrating. So that is the only anesthetic that I will use now with all my eyeliner work is migrating. We carry it on the Girls Inc. store. It is absolutely fantastic. All right. Let's move on. So another question that we've been getting a lot of, we actually got inundated with this particular question. And it's really the whole reason for this podcast, for this episode, but I didn't want to spend the whole episode talking about this one particular point. So we gathered more questions and some more information. So we had a little variety of anesthetic topics for you. But let's talk about the pupil situation, right? So there's a lot of artists having issues with pupils dilating with their anesthetic. And so, when you get one or two of these emails and questions, alarms don't go off. I mean, we get questions every single day, numerous questions every single day, and on many different things. And you get the same questions from different artists on many different things. But in this particular case, when it came to questions about pupil dilation, I felt like, okay, something's going on, because we're getting a ton of questions. And some of the questions were as simple as, is it normal when I do eyeliner that my clients are, their pupils are dilating? And I started answering them. And my answer was, no, no, it's not. So let's talk about the pupil situation. So pupil dilation, it can happen. It can happen even with a really good anesthetic, but it is exceptionally rare. It's exceptionally rare. And I know I often mention on lots of different topics that there are no absolutes, right? Or very few. There's absolutes when it comes to cleanliness, bloodborne pathogens, and other things that are more common sense. But when it comes to some procedural stuff, some reactions that can happen from pigments, anesthetics, when it comes to a lot of things in our industry, there are no absolutes. Because again, we're dealing with skin. We're dealing with different clients from all walks of life, and we don't know their medical history or background. Sometimes they don't even know if there's a medical issue or something going on. Lots of people don't even go to the doctors, you guys. I have clients that just don't go to the doctors, and now that I'm a little bit older, I find myself scolding them and telling them, you need to go to the doctor and get your blood work done. At the very least, you got to go get your mammograms and your yearly blood work and, all that stuff. I mean, you have to. But some people just don't go to the doctors. And it could be due to finances, no insurance, which is very, very sad and should not be happening in modern society, I don't think. But it's a reality for some people. But pupil dilation is a very, 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 very rare possible side effect that can happen with some topical anesthetics. It can look really scary, but usually, in most cases, it's temporary and not harmful. However, sometimes it can be a very serious situation. A very serious situation. So let's talk about why it happens. Some ingredients stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, which causes temporary dilation. When do you know it's not a serious situation? Well, you know it's not a serious situation if it happens mildly and resolves within a few minutes, like 5 to 15 minutes. I have done over 5,000 eyeliners. 5,000 eyeliners. And I've had three eyeliner clients have experienced pupil dilation. Only 3. And it is kind of scary. And thank God with all 3, I was using a very good anesthetic, and it was mild and it was temporary. And within that 5 to 15 minutes, the pupils went back down to normal. Okay? So how are you to know if it's mild? Again, it will resolve within a few minutes, 5 to 15 minutes. If it's mild, what the client may experience are the pupils slightly larger than normal. Just slightly larger than normal. They're both relatively the same size and slightly larger than normal. They have a slight sensitivity to light. Their vision may be a little blurry. There's no pain. Maybe it feels a little weird. Their eyes feel a little weird. And they have a little bit of a blurry vision, a little light sensitivity. But there is no pain. That's what the client will experience and feel if it's a mild case and temporary and will resolve itself. What should you do as the artist if you have a client that is expressing these symptoms? Well, first and foremost, keep the client calm. That's always very important, is keep the client calm. We might be freaking out inside, but we don't want to freak the client out. We want to keep the client calm because there's a really good chance that it's a very mild case and it's temporary and it's going to resolve in a few minutes. So keep the client calm and you remain calm. Dim the lights, right? Especially take away your floor lamps, your overhead lights. And if you can dim ceiling lights. Because there might be a little bit of light sensitivity. That happens when your pupils enlarge. Rinse out the eye with sterile eye wash to flush the eyes. Just gently rinse with sterile eye wash and flush. You can put a cool compress over the eyes. That can feel really soothing. Very soothing. So you can do that. You want to inform the client. Tell the client what you see, what's happening, what you're doing, why you're doing it, and that it should be temporary. Just like when we go to the eye doctor and they put drops in your eyes, right? A lot of doctors aren't doing that anymore, but some still do, and that used to be the norm. So that's what you want to explain to the client. Communication to the client and keeping the client calm is really important. And you staying calm is really important. So it's not time to panic yet. It's never time to panic. But it's not time to get overly concerned yet, okay? Because we're in the mild stages. And the pupils should return to normal in 5 to 15 minutes. Like I said, in my 3 cases, that's exactly what happened. So if that happens, the pupils return to normal, her vision clears up, everything's great, she feels great, it may be okay to continue the procedure. This would just depend on the things that I just mentioned. And it would also depend on how both you and the client felt continuing the procedure. In my 3 cases, in 2 of them, we continued the procedure. They were younger girls and their pupils went right back down. I mean, really, really quickly. And they were really comfortable moving forward. I felt comfortable. And I just didn't use anesthetic for the rest of the procedure, though, just to be safe. And I documented in their forms really, really well on what happened, so when I saw them next time, I was aware that this had happened prior. So, and my 3rd client that it happened to, she was an older gal. And she was not comfortable moving forward. She just wanted to stop and possibly reschedule. And I was right on board with that. I don't want to move forward if they don't want to move forward. Right? If they want to move forward, but I'm not comfortable, I'm not moving forward. Both the client and the artist need to feel really comfortable, safe, and secure moving forward. And in some cases, it may be okay to continue. You just want to document everything well, really well. So when to definitely stop and discontinue the procedure, right? Even if all those mild symptoms is what we're experienced. Slightly larger pupils, slight light sensitivity, no pain, just feels a little weird, When it's not okay to continue is if the eye issues or the condition persists longer than 15 minutes. It's not okay to continue. Or if the client has a history of eye issues, it is not okay to continue. So grab their consent form, which we do before we even start working on them. We grab their consent form and we're looking for, red flags, anything they may have checked or written down. But look at their form again and have a conversation. If they didn't check off a history of eye issues like glaucoma or dry eye or anything having to do with the eye, then verbally ask them, have you had any history at all with your eye issues? If they say yes, then you do not want to continue. And again, you certainly do not want to continue if the pupils stay slightly enlarged for longer than 15 minutes. Okay? When is it a more serious case and a must-stop situation? I have never had that happen. Now, my client that wanted to stop, she did not have a history of eye issues. Her pupils went right back down to normal. within that 15-minute period. No more blurriness. She did not have any pain. But she, like I said, she was an older gal. She was in her 70s. And I think she got a little frightened, And I remember her. She has 2 sisters, and they're all relatively the same age. And her 2 sisters are actually twins. And, I just hugged her and rubbed her back and told her it was okay. And, she drove herself home. She was perfectly fine. I told her to email me the next day, call me or email me the next day. She did. And it was all great. Everything was fine. But, some people just get a little more nervous, and that's okay. So that's why we didn't move forward with her, although it was probably a safe situation to move forward. But the client has to feel comfortable, and so does the artist. That has to align. So when is it a more serious case and a must-stop situation? When the pupils are large. They're really large, unreactive. One might be bigger than the other one. And if that's the case, that is a big red flag. So you always want to look at the pupils. You want to look at them and assess them. And I know we're not doctors, but we should know these things, right? We should know these things. If the pupils are really big and they're just unreactive, staying big, that's a more serious case. And if one pupil is larger than the other, that is considered a red flag. They are going to be extremely sensitive to light. Very, very, very sensitive to light. So you're going to want to take the same steps. You're going to want to turn the lights down and reduce that sensitivity, because that can be painful. So the client's going to have an extreme sensitive to light versus a slight sensitivity to light. Prolonged blurry vision and difficulty focusing, if they can focus at all. Okay? They could have headaches, nausea, or pain. Headaches, nausea, or pain can accompany large pupils in these serious cases. The client may start having anxiety because they feel like something's wrong. And when we have those symptoms that I just mentioned, then something can be seriously wrong, you guys. And so the client could become very, very anxious. So it's really important that you stay calm and talk to the client in a calming, soothing tone so we can reduce her anxiety. If it's been 30 to 60 minutes, especially if it's been more than an hour, this is a very serious case. If it's been 30, 60 minutes, or you start getting over an hour and those pupils are still big and that client is experiencing those symptoms, then this is a very, very, very serious case. You know, when it's a mild case, it's 5 to 15 minutes. So when you start getting over that 15-minute mark, you know, in that 15 to 30-minute mark, you're monitoring very closely because now you're teetering on, is this a mild case that's going to resolve itself? Or is this turning into a serious case? And you're going to know in the next few minutes what that answer is. So what should you do if it starts to be 30 to 60 minutes? What should you do as the artist? The client is laying down in your bed and you want to, turn down the lights because they are extremely sensitive to lights. If you can turn the lights off, if that's possible, you just got to get the lights out of their eyes because now it's painful. It's not just they're sensitive to light. Now the light becomes exceptionally painful to the client. And then you want to keep that client calm. It's very, very, very important. This is very important. I know inside you're probably dying, right? You're dying and because you're scared. You're scared. We've all had moments, myself included, where things have gone wrong in a procedure and the artists, we get scared. But these are the times that it's most important that we keep our composure. We remain calm because we have a job to do. We have a responsibility to that client, and that's to keep that client calm and comfortable. So you're talking to the client in a soothing, calming voice. You're explaining her that it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. I'm here with you. Got the lights turned down. Now I'm going to flush your eyes. Okay, gently flush her eyes out. A cool compress may feel very, very, very soothing, very comfortable. That can be very helpful. And you're going to want to have the client call a family member or friend to come pick them up. Or you are going to have to call on their behalf a family member or friend to come pick them up. Right? And so now you have the task and the responsibility of informing the client that this is not a common reaction. I don't want you to be alarmed. I know it's difficult. I can feel you're anxious, but I want you to relax the best you can. Everything's going to be okay. I'm following proper protocol, and I'm here with you. But this is not a common reaction. We're not going to proceed with the procedure. I can't let you drive, and we're going to call a family friend or family member. Okay? That's what you should do as an artist. You also need to inform the client that if their pupils have not resolved themselves, gone back down to normal, vision clears up, you start feeling better, in the next hour after leaving you, or if anything worsens, they should see a doctor. They should go to the emergency room and see a doctor, just to rule out that anything is serious. Okay? Now, again, you want to explain these things to the client because it's important. It's important that you inform the client, but in a manner, that doesn't freak them out. And that can be hard to do. That can be hard to do because we're freaking out. So you just have to, put that in a place. I guess you just got to like buck up, put that in a place, and not focus on how you're feeling, but you're caretaking for that client right now. It's all about the client and following those steps that I just mentioned, keeping her calm, having a friend come pick her up or a family member, and advising her to see a doctor if it doesn't clear up when she gets home or if anything worsens. And then you want to stay in contact with that client. You want to follow up with that client. That's very important. It's very, very important that you follow up with the client. So tell the client, I'm going to call you tomorrow. And I think sometimes phone calls are a little bit more intimate, you know, but a lot of young people don't do calls, you know, and then some people might tell you, well, you know, this could end up being a situation where she wants a refund, or, you know, if it does worsen, they have to go to the emergency room. They may expect you to not just refund for the procedure, but pay the emergency bill. So maybe it's best that you keep everything in writing. So, you know, you know, when things like this happen, this is why consent forms are so important. The detail of them, the extent of them are so important. And the way we handle these situations when they happen, even though that they're exceptionally rare, right? How we handle them can make all the difference in the world on how that client is going to move forward after having an experience like this. Do you know? So, like I said, I had 3 clients. None of them had to go to the emergency room or anything like that. I have never had anybody have to go to an emergency room, or I've never had that kind of situation. I mean, knock on wood, thank goodness, I'm really super blessed. I just haven't had, I've had things go wrong, go awry, not go my way, weird shit happen, you know, that I had to deal with, but I've never had anyone have to go to the emergency room. However, in some of these phone calls and emails that I'm getting, their clients are having to go to the emergency room and go to doctors. There's been some really significant and serious cases happening, and happening like all at once to multiple artists. So that's why I wanted to do this podcast, is to inform the artist and educate and give some tips on, if it happens to you, what you should do. Because some of these artists really are freaking out and they just don't know what to do. They just don't know what to do when it happens. You know, some of them do. Their gut instinct, you know, is kind of guiding them and they're doing the right thing. And some artists are just freaking out and they don't know what to do. And there has been some cases where the artist has gladly and offered, you know, to refund the procedure and even pay all the doctor's bills and emergency bills and bills, you know, if there was medication prescribed. And then we've gotten some questions where, you know, should they refund the procedure? And should they pay for the doctor's bills? Should they contact their insurance company? You know, there's just a lot. There's a lot going on when it becomes a serious case. There's a lot going on. It's happening fast. Maybe you've never experienced it before. It's all new. It's scary. And there's a lot of variables. It can all work out where everything ends up okay and you keep a good relationship with that client, or it can all go sideways and go very, very badly and the client can start threatening to sue. It really depends on, I'm going to assume all artists are just going to be tender and loving and caring and take care of that client the best they know how in a situation like this. I'm just going to assume that because I think that's true. However, we know that there are clients, and nowadays lots of clients, that are not always so understanding, tender, and loving. There's clients that can become very angry, very litigious, very unstable, very angry at us, and they want to be compensated. So depending on the situation would depend on if you need to contact your insurance company and contact your lawyer, right? And hopefully it doesn't get to that. Hopefully, like me, if you end up doing 5,000 eyeliners like I have, you may have 3 clients get dilated pupils. 3 to 5. I mean, come on, I've done over 5,000 and I've had 3. That shows you how rare it is. But I think there's some reasons that I've only had 3. So it is rare. It is rare. But for whatever reason, it's not so rare right now with a bunch of artists, a bunch of different artists located in different states. So let's talk about the pattern problem. As I mentioned, it can happen. This can happen. It is exceptionally rare. I cannot say that enough, how rare that it is. But it can happen. An allergic reaction to nickel and pigments on the last episode. Exceptionally rare. Almost probably won't happen, but it can. There's no absolutes, And look, I have lots of friends that do lots of eyeliners. Amber, Rashawn. I got lots of friends, Christina, Melancheco. There's just lots and lots and lots. I got lots of colleagues all over the world that do lots of eyeliners. And we've been discussing this because they were getting questions too. And all of us, and there's a ton of us that do lots of eyeliners, either have never had clients experience pupils dilating, or if they have, it was like me, once out of, 1,000 or a couple thousand, once or twice, very, very, very rare. So the odds of it happening is exceptionally low and exceptionally rare. So it should not be happening a lot or continuously. It just should not be happening a lot or continuously. If it is, it's a sign that something is off and terribly wrong. Not all anesthetics cause this or do this. There's some really great anesthetics. I use them. And those high quality superior anesthetics do not cause the pupils to dilate on a consistent basis with numerous artists. They just don't. They're formulated not to do that. Now, again, just so I put it out there, even with high quality, responsibly made anesthetics with ingredients and pH levels safe to be used around the eye, it can happen, but again, it's exceptionally rare. I'm sorry I keep repeating that, but I want to make that very clear. But if you have an anesthetic and it's consistently doing that to your clients when you're performing eyeliner procedures, there's a problem. There is a problem. It's possibly it's too aggressive, poorly formulated, not pH balanced. I don't know. But if you are using a particular anesthetic and you're experiencing numerous clients getting dilated pupils and to the level that they have to go to the emergency room, then there is a problem with that anesthetic, especially if that anesthetic states that it is safe for eyeliner use. Okay. Now, if that anesthetic says do not use around the eyes, not safe for eyeliner, then that's on you, not the anesthetic. But if that anesthetic states that it can be used around the eye area, but avoid getting in the eye, and that anesthetic is causing consistent, numerous pupils to dilate, then there's a problem with that anesthetic. You know, it can be overuse and improper use by the artist. Maybe you're putting too much on and getting it all into the eyeball. Do you know? I have run into artists that don't have their clients remove their contact lenses before an eyeliner procedure. That is really dangerous because you know what can happen? The anesthetic, if that anesthetic gets into the eyeball and it moves around that eyeball and it moves and gets trapped under that contact lens, well, hell, you've got a big problem. You've got a big, big problem. You're probably going to get dilated pupils and you could even get corneal burns and abrasions. That's why it's so important that clients remove their contact lenses. I don't even let my clients put their contacts back in until 5 days. I say 72 hours at a minimum, but I really push for 5 days. That's how strict I am. Because we're talking the eyeballs, you guys. This is a place, this is eyesight. It's not just a place on the face. This is someone's eyesight. You know, one of the 5 senses, eyesight. So you can't mess around. And you can never be too conservative and too cautious when it comes to eyeliner or anything that we do, but especially eyeliner because it's their sight. You know, so sometimes it's not the fault of the anesthetic. It's artist mistake, overusing it, improper use, you know, not having the client remove contact lenses. The anesthetic gets all in the eyeball. And then, in some cases, it could be the anesthetic. So if it's happening to you a lot, if you're listening to this podcast right now, and you're one of those artists, maybe even you're one of those artists that called us or emailed us, or you're one of those artists, this has happened to you with an anesthetic, and it's happening to you a lot, it's time for you to reconsider and adjust. Time to reconsider that anesthetic or adjust your application of the anesthetic and where you apply that anesthetic, or both. Or both. It just depends on how the manufacturer or the owner of that anesthetic markets that anesthetic. Again, if it's marketed and being told to you it's safe to use for eyeliner, and you're experiencing a lot of clients getting dilated pupils, and something's wrong with that anesthetic, or your application. But if other artists are also experiencing the same thing from the same anesthetic, then most likely it's the anesthetic. Right? It would be time to reconsider that brand, or at the very least, do not use it for eyeliners. That was a mouthful. Some anesthetics, like I said, are not meant to be used for eyeliners, and they state so right on the label, right in the information that the manufacturer puts out about that anesthetic. And some eyeliners, some anesthetics are formulated and meant to be safe to use for eyeliners. So we, artists, are responsible for what we put on our clients. We're responsible. Right? Just because it numbs fast or well doesn't mean it's safe or clean. And I think, well, for those that have been in the industry long enough, we know 100%, just because the manufacturer or brand says so doesn't always make it so. We've had to learn that the hard way on many different products and pigments in this industry. Over the last 25 years, I've been in this industry. I've seen it, I've learned it, I've experienced it with myself, close artists, artists that I mentor, and the industry itself. So we artists, we have to do our homework. We have to do our due diligence and our homework. And we have to understand the ingredients and know how and where that specific anesthetic is meant to be used. Where it's meant to be used and how it's meant to be used. And it's really important to not normalize what's not normal, and pupils dilating all the time is not normal. It's just not normal and should not be happening, period. And I told you all, I'll just remind you, I use migrating as my pre-numb for all my eyeliners, and I use Tag 45 or Feel Better Now for my secondary, just whichever one's closest to me. They're both really, really good. Migrating and Tag 45 is made by the same company, Pain Stoppers, founded by Linda Dixon. I think she founded her anesthetics company and started launching anesthetics back in 1995, 96, somewheres like that. You know, and I've had the pleasure of meeting her and talking to her, sitting in on some of her lectures personally. Brilliant woman. And anything made by Pain Stoppers, you can trust. All of her anesthetics are registered with the FDA, and there has been no issues with her anesthetics. But be careful with that tag 45. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Be careful with that tag 45 because there's lots of counterfeits. You want to make sure you're buying the official tag 45, original tag 45. Okay, so let's talk about occluding the eye. It's not okay. It's just not okay. And I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say that's an absolute. For me, that's one of the absolutes in PMU. You do not occlude the eye. You don't put anesthetic on the eyelid or the bottom area, the bottom lid, lash line, and then put plastic on it and occlude it. It's okay for the brows, it's okay for lips, it's okay for other areas of the body, but it is not okay for the eye. And I know some people are teaching this. Some people are saying it's okay. And I disagree with them. I may agree with them on lots of other things, but on that, I disagree with them. I highly disagree with them. And I'm going to debate my case. The skin around the eye is thin. It's extremely thin, extremely vascular, and it is extra absorbent. Okay? And that thin, vascular, extra absorbent skin lays right over the eyeball, the pupil, the iris, the eyeball in which we use to see. Okay? Occlusion boosts absorption, meaning it absorbs quicker, deeper. Okay? That's why people like to occlude. But that means a higher risk of side effects, especially on that eye area. And I'm talking only the eye area. I got no problems occluding on the brows, lips, areolas. No issues with that at all. I personally don't occlude. Not because I'm not okay with it. I just never got into the habit of it. I think it's something you learn early on and it just becomes a habit, like a part of your process, your setup. And I never got in the habit of it. So I don't occlude. And I don't need to. You know, my clients are fairly comfortable with the anesthetics I use and with the way I numb. I probably would occlude if I had, you know, a ton of clients that were uncomfortable or in a lot of pain. I would probably look to occlusion for those areas to help me out, help the client out a little bit. But I don't have those issues. But when it comes to occlusion, occluding those eyes, it's a big no. And it really, really increases the risk of the side effects of that migration into the eyeball can cause, right? Because it can increase anesthetics migrating into the eyeball. It gets, especially if you're already using an anesthetic that's melty and runny and drippy. Now you occlude it, the anesthetic gets warmer, and it becomes watery, greasy, oily, and it drips down into the lashes and just, seeps in the slit of their eyes. It's terrible. It's terrible. It can really, really irritate the eye or burn the eye, or worse, corneal burn. You don't want a corneal burn. We don't want corneal abrasions. We don't want to irritate the eye. We don't want to do anything to increase the risk of dilating those pupils, causing blurry vision, causing anything like that. We don't want to, us artists don't want to do something in our process or our setup that's going to increase those risks. It's not worth it, right? For less numbing minutes or a little extra comfort for the client. It's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. And if you use microcaine as your pre-numb, once you make that first pass on the eyes and then tag 45 or feel better now, just a little bit, don't gob it on there. That client should be, 90% of your clients are going to be really comfortable. I mean, that's what I experience. That's what most people experience. So it's just not worth the risk, and, some people occlude for less numbing minutes, who cares? Book out a little extra time or that little extra, comfort for the client. But I'm telling you, it's not worth it. Wrapping the eyelid in plastic, it's not extra care for the client. It's not going the extra mile for the client. It can cause lots and lots and lots of problems that you don't want for yourself, especially for the client. All right, so let's talk anesthetics and pigment retention. Some people, this is a trend, there's some artists now in the industry, and this never used to be a topic. Everybody used anesthetics, and, some artists got great retention, some artists don't. It's always been like that since the beginning of permanent makeup and tattooing. But, the debate, started on if numbing ruins retention. That's what some artists will tell you. And that's a myth. I don't agree with that. The truth is, overuse or leaving it on too long can potentially mess with your retention. So that I agree with. That I 100% agree with. Overuse or leaving it on too long can potentially mess with your retention. But using pre-numbs and secondary ruin your retention, I don't agree with. I think that's a big blanketed statement, and I think that's a myth. So let's demystify that myth. Okay? So I pre-numb and I use a secondary. I like my clients very, very comfy, especially when it comes to eyeliner. And I have never, ever, ever had any issue where anesthetics affected my healed-in retention. Actually, I'm really well known for my healed-in retention, for the healed-in retention I achieve on that first session. I think that's what attracted people to me and my online classes, my in-person classes, is my retention. And I have always used anesthetics. So, and of course, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of artists all over the world using prenups and secondaries properly that get really awesome healed and retention as well. So, with proper application, anesthetics won't affect your pigment retention, and it won't cause additional trauma. It won't. If you're using anesthetics, prenups sparingly, and secondaries sparingly, and only when needed, you're not going to encounter retention problems or additional trauma. With my secondary, so I do a prenup. It sits for 15 or 20 minutes. I clean it off really good. I do a first pass. I get lots of color in on that first pass. And then I apply a secondary, either Tag, 45, or Feel Better Now. Very little. I take a Q-tip, and there's very little on the Q-tip. I roll it on a paper towel, get excess off, and I just roll it nicely, glide it over the area I just tattooed, and I let it sit for a couple of minutes. And that controls the bleeding. It gets the client to a deeper comfort level and allows me to work. Now, after that first application of my secondary, if the client remains comfortable and she's not really bleeding, then I just complete the procedure. I don't reapply it again. I don't have to. There's no need. If the client is in pain or if she's bleeding, then I will apply it again, but sparingly, not gopping it on there. When you overuse or oversaturate with anesthetics, it can change the texture of the skin. It can make that skin rubbery or spongy. Leaving an anesthetic on too long can overprocess the skin and change the skin texture. So when you see artists out there saying that you should not use anesthetics because it changes the texture, makes the skin rubbery, the needle don't bounce back right, and it affects your retention, that's just such a blanket statement and doesn't apply to all artists and all cases and all clients. It may apply if you're misusing the anesthetic, putting way too much on, leaving it on too long, right? You should never leave it on more than the manufacturer instructs. And you should never overuse it and keep applying it if the client doesn't need it. Learn to use your anesthetics as needed, right? Sometimes I'll have clients say, can you apply more? Can you apply more of that stuff? And I dip my Q-tip in water, like in a little water or a little pigment seal. And I'll roll it on her the eyeliner or the brow. And she thinks it's anesthetic. She thinks it's Tag 45 for Pete's sake. And she's like, oh, okay, yeah, boy, that stuff really works. It's all placebo. Placebo's a real thing, So we can trick our clients into behaving the way we want and feeling what we want. We really can. We really, really can. So I always give them little prep talks before the procedure. I tell them what they're going to feel, what it's going to be like. Like I plant that seed, that placebo. The other thing is we have to take in consideration the skin. Is it thin and dry? right? Which may absorb anesthetic quicker. Or is it thick and oily skin, which you may need to leave it on for the entire time the manufacturer suggests. So skin matters. I mean, if I'm working on, a 70-year-old woman and she has extremely thin skin and she's dry, and the manufacturer suggests that I leave it on 20 minutes, I'm not going to leave it on 20 minutes. Maybe like 12 minutes, half the time, 10 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes, because her skin is thin and dry. It's not thick. There's no oil barrier. So her skin's going to absorb much quicker, much better, and she's going to anesthetize much quicker, much better. So skin matters. So, keep that in mind. And we're going to wrap this up by me advising that you never buy off Amazon. Just don't do it, you guys. There's enough suppliers in our industry that are reputable and that are stocking reputable anesthetics with a long, long history. Migrating, Tag 45, Dotsie Blue, Ultra Duration, all made by Linda Dixon, Pain Stoppers. Since 1996. That is a long history. That is a long history in our industry. And over that long period of time in our industry, those anesthetics have been proven to be safe, made responsibly, with all high quality ingredients, registered with the FDA. When you're buying off Amazon, there may be no ingredient regulation. You can get EMLA off Amazon, and you should never use EMLA around the eyes. Never, 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 never. There's risk of expired, tampered, or fake product. Ton of fake product. This takes me back to Tag 45. There are a lot of fake Tag 45s. And that became a real problem, and probably still is a real problem for the company who makes Tag 45. They had to, change their label. They have to keep addressing it because there's a ton of fake Tag 45s. Well, you don't know what the hell's in there. They can type on the label what's in there, but it's a fake product. How do you know the ingredients that are listed on there is actually what's in there? That happens all the time, you guys. There's no way to verify the origin of that anesthetic, how that anesthetic was formulated, how it was stored. Again, no ingredient regulation. You're playing with safety, and your client pays the price. The artist as well. And I believe strongly that, this is another one of those absolutes. I guess there's more absolutes than I thought. But I believe strongly we should not be buying our products off Amazon. Pick a really good supplier. Most suppliers, or a lot of them, are artist-owned, like myself. September 9th, I'm celebrating 25 years in PMU. And I'm an artist. I've been in this industry a long, 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 long time. This industry, this craft, everything about it became my life. It's my life. It's my life. And I was blessed enough to break out in different branches of the industry. The artistry and the craft of doing procedures. Having an online store and offering high quality products from great manufacturers that I trust, that care, training, mentoring, creating my own products. And I own the Girls Inc. store. And there's other artist-owned supply companies. Artist-owned. And I think it's important to support those artist-owned supply stores. Of course, if they're doing the right thing and supplying top quality, superior products and giving you good customer support and all that stuff. But stay away from Amazon. It's like the wild, wild west. And I know too many bad stories about products being bought off Amazon. I know too many bad stories. So use anesthetics that are specifically formulated for the areas of permanent makeup only by trusted manufacturers that have a long record of safe anesthetics, right? It's really, really important. Never use medical strength anesthetics. They're not for cosmetic tattooing. Don't be going to compound pharmacies or using anesthetics that are made in compound pharmacies. They're designed for medical procedures under medical supervision only. No anesthetic should be made at a compound pharmacy. And you shouldn't be using them. I don't care if you're a nurse or if you're in the medical industry. Don't ever use medical grade anesthetics. Only use anesthetics made for the purpose of permanent makeup by trusted manufacturers. Right? There's high risk of skin damage, burns, systemic absorption, and other really bad, dangerous side effects. And using medical grade anesthetics is beyond the scope of our license as an artist. It's not allowed. It's illegal. And insurance won't cover you. So you never want to do, you never want to step outside the bounds of your license. You always want to make sure you're staying within the scope of your license, using really good high quality products, and following all the steps required by your insurance company. Okay, here's some quick bonus truth bombs before I let you go. Light skin and redheads typically have lower pain tolerance. So you may need to apply a little bit more or just deal with their bitching and griping. But light heads, light skin, light eyes, redheads typically have a lower pain tolerance. So be ready for them. Be ready for them. Don't mix different anesthetics together. Never do it. Just like we don't mix different pigment brands together. Never mix different anesthetic brands together. Never tattoo over an anesthetic. You never, ever, ever want to implant an anesthetic. That could be very dangerous. That's why it's really important to remove and cleanse the skin of any trace of anesthetic. Never add anesthetic to your pigment cap. Never do that. Yes, people do that. Don't you do that. That is dangerous. And you're implanting anesthetic. Dangerous. Understand and learn to read blanching. how the skin blanches. That takes a little time, takes a little experience, but it's important to learn to read and understand blanching skin, because blanched skin can mask true skin tone and pigment retention or saturation levels. Okay, so Girls Inc., I'm going to give Girls Inc. a shout out. We stock only trusted and tested anesthetics. Pre-numbs, you can get that amazing microcaine for eyeliner, melt-free. It is the bomb. You'll never, ever use another pre-numb for your eyeliner ever again. We carry Zenza, which is an excellent pre-numb and secondary. 5% lidocaine, it's pH balanced, can be used around the eyes. Also has a little vitamin E in there for healing. Zenza's been around a long time now. Good anesthetic, but I do prefer microcaine for my eyeliners. For secondaries, feel better now. Lidocaine and epi, brows, eyes, and lips is what it's good for. And tag 45, lidocaine and epi, brows, eyes, and lips is what it's good for. And we carry Ultra Duration, which is 4% lidocaine, 2% tetracaine, and 0.05% epinephrine. And it is stated clearly on this bottle, not for eyeliner. Not for eyeliner. So don't ever use Ultra Duration around the eyes. If you do, you could encounter problems. And that would lie with you because it's clearly stated, not for eyeliner. There you go. I hope you found this episode informative, invigorating, and I hope it answers a lot of questions and just it causes you to be a little bit more conservative and responsible in understanding ingredients and really looking at labels and reading what the manufacturer states and writes about their anesthetics, if you're not already doing so. So I want to thank you all for hanging out with me today. I wouldn't be here if you weren't here, and it means the world to me. So I'll keep coming back if you keep coming back. That's the truth, that's the tea, and that's the Tatter-a-fact. Until next time, all of you, every single one of you, stay in the pursuit of excellence and stay in the pursuit of happiness.